So welcome everyone to the 2023 Izzy Awards. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. This is the second annual Irish Whiskey Society America Awards. 2023 was a great year, I think, for Irish whiskey, for the club. The IWSA had, I think, a really good year. New Cask, group trip to Ireland. We had 25% membership growth during the year. And those of you, I think, know, our tagline is celebrating Irish whiskey in the USA. And the Izzys really are the culmination of that. So today's the day that we kind of celebrate everything about Irish whiskey in the USA. So I thank you, members that are joining us live today, and all the Irish whiskey fans who participated in the voting process. Like I said, we have membership in 41 states now. So only a few remaining. I'm calling you out, Iowa and the Dakotas and several others. Try to get the full 50 in 2024. But in the meantime, we're going to go through today the 14 categories that are part of the 2023 Izzys. And I'll just take a moment to go over for you that maybe aren't familiar with the process. I'm sure, I think most of you probably all voted, but just to give those that maybe are watching this not live, what the Izzys are all about. So if you haven't figured it out, Izzys are just kind of an abbreviation like Grammys or Emmys, that kind of thing, for the IWSA. So that's where Izzy comes from. And we created this a year ago, so this is the second annual, and make up our own rules. So this is really kind of like a People's Choice Award type show. It's not a panel of experts doing, blind tastings or anything like that. So we give everybody the opportunity to have a vote in the categories. We did the nominations back in November and then had voting during the course of December into early January. There were 5 nominees in every category. So you'll see those again today, and then we'll reveal the favorite. We also have a special President's Award that I'm calling the Lifetime Favorite. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Allan Dwyer. I'm the president of the Irish Whiskey Society of America. And that will be the last thing we do today as part of this. We'll reveal the Lifetime Favorite. I'll explain more about that when we get to it. But I think that's all I need to say as far as opening remarks. And so what I'd like to do is jump right into things for those that have whiskeys to go along with the categories. No particular order for these, but did want to, so I came up with an order based on how I kind of wanted to do the tastings. So the first category that we're going to reveal today is the favorite new Irish whiskey. And, I should also mention that in order to be eligible for an Izzy, the whiskey has to be sold in the USA. So as we're going through this, some people may wonder why a particular whiskey is not in a category, or how can that not be nominated, that kind of thing. There are a lot of whiskeys that still aren't available in the US. So these are only, as we go through it, ones that you can buy here. The other thing that's a condition, I guess, of the Izzy's is that An Irish whiskey can only be nominated once in a category. So you're not going to see, maybe a favorite whiskey that everyone has nominated in 4 different categories. So again, it's one whiskey per category. And several of these, as you'll see as we go through it, technically could have been eligible in a lot of different categories, whether it be new, peated, cask strength, limited edition. Some whiskeys kind of, cross over and fit multiple categories, but you can only be in one. So that being said, with the new whiskeys, these are new to the US. And I bring that up because a couple of these have been around for a couple of years. In the case of Writer's Tears Redhead, that's been around for several years, but you couldn't get it here in the States. So in 2023, these 5 whiskeys came to the States. And they're in alphabetical order. Dingle, this is their core expression single malt. The Dublin Ink is an independent label blend. It's a 50% malt, 45% ABV sherry finish that some of you may have seen depending on where you live in the States. For Cullen Falls, out of Powers Court, was another blend, one of the first releases they did that contained some of their own distillate and came to the States beginning of the year. North Cross is another independent label. That's from Great Northern, 43% ABV. It's a triple wood cask finish, bourbon, virgin oak, and sherry. And then the Writer's Tears, I was mentioning, this is the Redhead single malt. So this was really the only single malt as part of the core expression lineup of Writer's Tears, and it wasn't available here for a while. Fairly unique whiskey. Not only is it a single malt, but it's heavily sherry because it's aged exclusively in sherry casks. So hence the name Redhead. Those who like sherry bombs, and if you haven't had a chance to try the Writer's Tears, it's pretty readily available now in the States. So those are the 5 nominees. And what I'll do is I'll probably spend more time talking about the nominees or a particular category if it's one that we're going to sample. So those of you that have samples and couldn't crack the code, the one that's labeled new is the one for new Irish whiskey category. So hopefully you've you found that, been able to pour it in your glass. And again, if you're taking bets, like you said, but here goes the reveal. And it's Dingo.
Dingo. Nice.
So kind of pre-poured mine, but the Dingle single malt core expression. So those of you that have followed Dingle, this was really the first new distillery to come along in 2012 in November. Prior to that, there were only 3 operating distilleries. Now we have over 40. Dingle came along, and they weren't one that was releasing sourced whiskeys. So once their whiskeys reached the age requirement, 3 years, they started releasing small batch releases, first of single malts, then of single pot stills, and that ended a couple of years ago. And then they came out with this core expression single malt, which again, it came out in Ireland first, and then kind of COVID was happening and some things, and then it finally kind of got all of its distribution this year. But it's a non-age statement single malt. It's made up of a mash bill that is 61% PX sherry malt and 39% bourbon cask. 46.3 ABV. And I'll stop talking there if you haven't already sampled it. Sláinte, everyone. First category, favorite new Irish whiskey in the US to Dingle.
Watch it.
Yeah, so I think those of you who had any of the prior Dingle releases, you get a very similar, what I consider to be, a characteristic of Dingle. You get that Dingle note on the malt. It's different than, what I'd call pre-existing Cooley or Bushmills note. Single malts, you definitely, I think, can pick up the Dingle characteristic. So it's great to see that some of the new distilleries are coming online and have core expressions out. I think Dingles continues to do other things as well. They're doing the Celtic Wheel Series, which are still some smaller limited edition runs that they're doing as well that are not available in the States. You can still find some of their previous small batch releases on stores around the country. But this classic blue label is the core expression. And, like I know Total Wine, for example, has it, which is in a lot of the different states if you're looking for it. Okay. So that'll kind of kick us off. So we can enjoy that as we move forward to the next category. And this is the favorite non-age statement, or NAS single malt. Again, has to be sold in the States. So these are going to be core expression whiskeys. What's nice about this category and these nominees, I think, is the distribution across different distilleries. So Connaught, which is one of the newer distilleries, this was their first batch release. They actually just won Whiskey of the Year award in the Irish Whiskey Awards, not for this one, but for their distillery reserve. So good things are coming out of Connaught. Method and Madness, the micro distillery down in Middleton. Sexton is a Bushmill source malt, one of the top selling single malts in the US with the heavy sherry finish. Tyrconnell out of the Kilbeggan distillery has quite a wide range of single malts. This is the core expression, non-age. And then Waterford, again, one of the newer distilleries out there. This is the Cuvée single malt expression. So good to see the different single malts coming out of the different distilleries. We're going to see more of them. There are others, of course, that maybe either just didn't crack the top 5 or just haven't made it to the States yet. So we'll have to keep an eye on this category as we go forward. But I don't know. We'll see. I don't know if anyone's got any side betting going on who's going to win this. But the favorite was actually Middleton. So, yep, the Method and Madness single malt. So this came out quite a while ago. When it first came out, it's actually not, it's a sourced Bushmills single malt. The micro distillery just started producing their own whiskey directly out of the micro distillery in 2023. So when this came out, it was actually 14-year-old Bushmills single malt that received its extra finishing in the micro distillery. So those of you that are familiar and follow the Method and Madness range, and there are dozens of different varieties now, but it's, a lot of it is what I would call the same base spirit, and they just put it into different types of casks that are pretty unique. And then on other occasions, it could be a kind of a special distillate. We'll see a couple other nominees later. I think that'll be examples of that. But this one was, part of the core range that came out. They did a single grain, a single pot still, and a single malt. And this was a 14-year-old single malt from Bushmills. And what kind of made it fall under the method of madness is at the time, the finishing was in a French limousine cask, which was very unique. So what you're getting here is the influence of that cask. It's going to be very floral. For those of you that have had it, it's a very nice single malt. Next category is favorite peated. This one probably received the least voter participation out of those that voted. So peat still is I guess, a polarizing category in the Irish whiskey world, which is fine. I think it's something that'll keep expanding and growing over time. These 5 nominees, though, I think represent a pretty good kind of cross section of what we can expect to see as we're kind of introducing people to the peat style. So kind of again in alphabetical, the Bill Fill is one of the first releases from W.D. O'Connell. That's a first fill bourbon, purple distilled. It's 47.5% ABV. The Black Pits from Teeling is one of the newer ones, just came out a couple of years ago. This one has the added element of using a Sauternes cask finish, 46%. I don't think in most cases these have released officially anyway. The PPMs, those that are really into their peated and to what level they're peated. But I'm sure if you ask Dahi or Alex from WD or Teeling, they might tell you, but it's not any of the official notes. The third nominee was Connemara from Kilbeggan. This is the oldest peated representation in the Irish whiskey sector. Silky is a range of peated whiskeys from Slieve League, the Ardara Distillery in Donegal. This particular one was the dark silky. So there are several different ones. The dark silky is a sherry cask. This one they actually do let you know it ended up after going about a 22 ppm. For those that are interested in that kind of thing. And then the last one is a Dunville's, the Three Crowns. What's a little bit different about this is actually whiskey that wasn't made from peated malt, but instead was a blend that was had 10-year and 15-year single malts along with some grain, and it was finished in a peated cask. So there are different ways to bring out the peat element. You can use peated malt, or you can use a peated former cask that had peat in it. So those are the 5. And this was an interesting race. I was watching all of the categories kind of on a daily basis, and this one went back and forth. But ultimately, who ended up as the favorite was Connemara. So congratulations to Connemara. This is the first repeat winner we've had, no pun intended. But this is the second year in a row that Connemara came up as the favorite. They do have a 20-year head start on the others. Not to take anything away from it. It's a lovely whiskey if you've had the opportunity to try it. Very approachable, single malt. There's a lineup or a range of Connemara's. This is the core original expression, so it's the 40% single malt, uh, which is a nice way to kind of introduce to the style. I think any of these though are a good way to kind of introduce your palate to it if you haven't tried yet, or if you're still a little reluctant on peat. The Sauternes finish at Teeling presents a nice balance to it. Um, they all do a little bit different, and there's a lot of different peats to use and different ways to do it. I think you're going to see more and more coming from some of the newer distilleries. So this is a category that's going to keep expanding. So Connemara right now is kind of clearly the carrier of this category. Been around the longest, but it'll have these other ones, I think, nipping at its heels as we go forward. But again, congratulations to Connemara, second year in a row for this category. And this is a new category introduced this year, and that is favorite rye influenced Irish whiskey sold in the US. And part of this is because this 2023, if you're looking to kind of characterize the year in Irish whiskey, a lot of different ways you could go, but one way would be it was the year of rye, because three of these nominees really came out this year, or I'm sorry, in 23. But rye has really come back into the scene and is being used by more and more of the newer distilleries, as well as some of the pre-existing ones. It used to be a grain that was used quite a bit, fell out of favor and has really kind of made a strong comeback. So we'll talk a little bit about these because this is one that you have in your sample pack, one called rye. If you can break the code. I'm just seeing if there are any. Okay. So of these, just to kind of go through them for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with all of these, but the Kilbeggan small batch rye was really the first one to kind of reintroduce rye in an Irish whiskey. And it didn't really, their intent was to reintroduce rye, but this one actually started out as a single pot still at Kilbeggan when Kilbeggan reopened, and they actually started making their own whiskeys. They created this one. It has a 30% rye component, but it's really a single pot still, malted, unmalted barley. The problem is after they did it and it was aging, the technical file came out and they redefined or more strictly defined the rules for what could be a single pot still, and you could only have 5% other grains. Because this has 30% rye, when they released it, they had to call it something else, so they called it a small batch rye, which is I don't know if I want to use the word unfortunate, but originally it would have been a single pot still with a heavy rye component. It's called a rye, and those people that are rye fans would probably question that because they'd say, well, it doesn't have at least 50% rye, so why is it called a rye? So I think it kind of got caught up in the technical file details. But in any case, this was really one of the first ones to reintroduce rye, 30% Kilbeggan. You can think of it as a single pot still, even though it can't be called that. The next one came out of the micro distillery in Middleton again. So this is the second Method in Madness nominee tonight or this afternoon. This was the Ryan Malt blend, and this is the US exclusive. So this had come out a couple of years ago for Europe. It was a double distilled This is the US version. It's different. So if you've tried the other one, this one's different. You can do them side by side, but this one is a triple distilled, and it's 60% rye, 40% malt, and it's about 6 years bourbon cask finish at 46%. The third one is another Middleton release that came out this year. Many of you probably participated in our launch event for this when it hit the States, launched here first back in February last year. So this is the Powers 100% Irish rye, first of its kind. So it's completely rye and it's Irish rye. Middleton owns the farm where they're producing the rye. They use the same farm sourced rye to do the rye and malt method in madness, if you're wondering. Next one is Short Cross, the Ranelagh Distillery. This is another blend that does double this. I'm sorry, this one's a double distill. Has two different casks, bourbon and virgin chinkapin oak, and it's a 50-50 rye malt split. So all of these are a little bit different in terms of how much rye they're putting in, maybe what casks they're using, but for the most part, they're using bourbon casks, and I think part of that, the idea too, is you don't want to you want to bring the rye component out. Last nominee is second nominee tonight from W.D. O'Connell, and this is their 10-year single grain. So get a single grain style into the mix here. And why this category was more or less called rye influence, because this one doesn't technically contain rye. It was a single grain that was finished in rye casks. So it spent 10 to 12 years in bourbon casks and then was finished in rye casks. So hence the rye influence of the category. So all a little bit different, bringing rye into the mix. So it's a pretty exciting category for those that have had rye, maybe from American or Canadian rye before. And again, you should have a sample of this. And without further ado, we'll kind of, and it's the Powers Irish rye. Congratulations to Middleton Irish Distillers Powers. This was voted favorite of the category. I don't know if it's a huge surprise. Powers is, big favorite, and this is just an excellent whiskey. And I think the 100% Irish rye aspect of it really brings out a lot of the what people love about rye. But we did a big event when this came out. Some of you may remember almost a year ago now. We had reps from Irish distillers talking about it, giving the whole history of it. So if you missed that or interested in that, the video of the event and an interview we did with them all about this release, because it was a kind of a long time coming in terms of their planning. That's all on our website and our YouTube channel. We also, as part of it, had a cocktail created out of it, the Irish Built Manhattan. And those who participated in the event received a nice package, with vermouth and cherries and the Powers rye, so they could make the cocktail. This was kind of one of the biggest releases of the year. And again, kind of going back to what I was saying up front, you can see where a lot of these whiskeys could have been in multiple categories. So this easily could have been in New Irish Whiskey of the Year in the States too, but tried to avoid having, one whiskey in 5 different categories kind of thing. So let's launch, everyone.
Launch.
I don't know if I did it consciously or not, but two of, this was one of my favorite whiskeys of the year. I'm a big fan of Dingle as well, so kind of started off out of the gate with two that I really like. Not that I don't like what's coming, but build some momentum here. But I think the Powers Irish Rye is a really nice addition to the Powers lineup. They also added at the very end of the year the cask strength version of the Powers John's Lane, which has not made it to the States yet. Can't say for sure it's going to. It's a kind of more of a limited annual release, and I don't know exactly what the plan is yet on that. That just came out at the end of the year in Ireland. It's available in duty free, and you can order it online, but not yet available here in the States. But that's also another. So if you're wondering, why wasn't that part of the nominees? Kind of came out too late in the cycle, but it never came here. So that's probably the real reason why it's not in it. But you should get, if you're tasting this, orange peel, the clove spice from the rye. Get a little bit of ginger maybe. But what I think is really nice about this is because it's all rye, it gives you really brings out that grain. And using bourbon casks, it's really just letting the rye shine. It's not trying to really have much wood influence, anything like that. It's really just kind of in your face. Here's the Irish rye. So, again, it's one of my favorites of the year for sure. Pretty readily available where Middleton products are. Pretty cheap, I think, $30, give or take. So recommend you pick up a bottle if you should see it. Yeah, I can. I know. We'll work on it. We'll take suggestions for next year in terms of categories. I think I introduced a half a dozen or so new categories this year. I'm holding out the idea of having a category of not available in the States for now. And that's mainly just because, again, going back to what our tagline is, it's celebrating Irish whiskey in the USA. So right now it's kind of been, let's keep it to stuff that you can get here. And if we opened it up to other stuff, it would end up, I think, being a little bit too, it would be too specific. You get stuff that one-offs that people had over there, no one's really had. It would kind of diminish, I think, a lot of the voting participation. So again, it's something, make up the rules as I go here, but certainly take it under advisement as we get closer next year to putting the stuff together and kind of figure out, because I think part of the whole thing with the categories was what's the best way to get more representation and really be able to celebrate the whole industry. Those of you that saw last year and watched last year's video, it was a very heavily dominated Middleton event where Middleton came out with like half the favorites at least. So here we have Middleton, I think, it's already taken two of the categories even this year, and that was even though an effort was made to expand the categories to have non-Middleton representation, just so it wouldn't dominate. But that's, I think, one of the challenges because the industry is really young. So I think that's something people should keep in mind. When we started back in 2010, there were 3 operating distilleries. And pretty much the only thing you could get was Jameson, Redbreast, and Powers. And when I say that, I mean Powers Gold, Redbreast 12, Jameson. When we started, you didn't have Black Barrel, you didn't have John's Lane, you didn't have any of the Redbreast lineup other than the 12. You had Cooley and Cooley independent labels, and then you had the Bushmill core range. So it's really, exploded over the last dozen years. And I think certainly Middleton is still leading the way. But as you'll see as we go through a lot of these categories, there was a intent made to expand to allow others to be represented. Again, just so people can hopefully experience, more Irish whiskeys than just because a lot of the stores, as you know, only carry, a lot of the stuff that existed 10 years ago, and they haven't really caught on to some of the newer distilleries or brands yet. So part of the idea too is to bring more recognition to those brands so they can get in the stores and get in your hands. All right. That's my soapbox moment. And as I do that, we get to the next category, and here it is, a Middleton Irish Distillers category again. But there's no way, to keep them down, so to speak. Not that we're trying to. They put out great whiskeys. But one of the ways too was to, rather than have a lot of their whiskeys dominate in every single category, we'll create a category where we put them all up against each other. So in this particular new category this year, we said, let's do favorite spot, which is the spot range of single pot still whiskeys from Middleton. So here you see the 5 nominees. Those of you that are spot fans, I think will recognize these. The 7 years, the cask strength version with the Madeira finish, the original, so to speak, the green spot, the non-age statement, but it's 7 to 10 year whiskeys on average, bourbon sherry cask, 40%. Green Spot has a range now known as the Wine Geese series. This is one of those. This is the Chateau Leoville Barton version. I think the Wine Geese series, in addition to having an additional cask finishing from the traditional Green Spot, they also come at 46% ABV, so that's another slight variation. Red Spot is the 15-year-old version. This came out a couple of years ago. And the Yellow Spot, 12-year. All of these have different wine cask finishing. So in the case of Red Spot, it's Marsala. But I won't hold you in suspense. This was another close vote, with Yellow Spot coming out on top in the end. So what can we say about Yellow Spot? Yellow Spot has a lot of significance to it because, again, I was going back to what I was saying a few minutes ago about how when we started in 2010, the breadth of the industry was pretty limited. And when Yellow Spot came out, it was a big deal. This was released as part of Whiskey Live. And I remember I was on my way to Whiskey Live. I was coming from the airport. I think I was in a cab, and I got an alert on my phone that this had been released, and it was kind of a surprise at the time. So this came out in 2012 in Ireland. Didn't actually hit the States until 2015. So we had to wait 3 years for it to be on the shelves here, at least. But it was, again, significant because at the time you only had Green Spot, Redbreast 12. And then as things were emerging, Middleton started releasing new pot stills every year. This was the first new spot variety. it was a pre-existing. So those of you that know your spot history know that now we have the full range back. So this was a reimagining that was done. They found an old bottle, and then basically recreated it from what they could tell from that bottle. What's unique about this is that it's not a finishing. So what they did was they took three different, they took the pot still and they put it into three different casks and they aged them separately for 12 years. So the three casks were bourbon, sherry, and Malaga wine. And at the end of the 12 years, they married it together. So it's married rather than finished. So again, at the time, that was kind of unique, kind of a new thing to most people. This is going to be a little bit sweeter than Green Spot due to that Spanish wine influence. But I think it's been a favorite since it's come out. I know a lot of people are Blue Spot fans because of the cask strength. Then you have your traditional Green Spot people. I would probably fall into that camp myself. But yeah, so again, Yellow Spot came out on top in this voting. And yeah, I was going to say, Joe, I'm guessing that you voted for Red Spot. Maybe no one else could because they couldn't get it. But they're going to continue to release stuff. They released another Green Spot variety this year, or I'm sorry, in 23, the which is nominated in a category coming up. I think the traditional spots have all been resurrected at this point. They did do Gold Spot a year ago as a special one-off limited release. That was excellent, by the way. So I think again, Spot range is pretty popular, and it's good whiskey. That's why it's so popular. But Yellow Spot comes out on top this year. Okay. Next category is for favorite single malt aged, and pick the 10 to 18 year range. So we've already done the non-age statement single malt. These are gonna this category again, it has to be in the States, and it's going to tend to represent what I'm going to call those that have a core expression that is also aged. And there aren't as many of those. There are plenty of one-off limited edition aged single malts. So they may be in a different category today or just didn't make the top five. But I know a lot of the distilleries release a lot of aged stuff that's not necessarily a core expression. So not everybody may have had it, which can explain partly, which is not as widespread known and popular. But these five, again, pretty good representation from different providers. Dunville's, which is the brand from the Ecklandville distillery. This is their 10-year PX sherry variety. This is one of the first ones they did. They've done plenty other age statements and finishes with things like Palo Cortado, for example. They've won plenty of awards in Ireland and elsewhere. This is the PX Sherry 10-year, which is pretty readily available for a number of years around here. Second is from Jack Ryan, the whiskey finishers out of Dublin. The Ryan family has been in the business for over 100 years. Some of you may have participated in the event we did with them a couple months ago. This is their 12-year Beggar's Bush. It's aged exclusively in bourbon casks. Lovely whiskey. Napogue Castle 14-year-old. This is the Twinwood. So it's bourbon and sherry, 46%. So it's a little bit higher ABV than the 12-year variety. Tullamore Dew 14, Forwood. And then finally the Tyrconnell 10-year Madeira finish. So Tyrconnell's got a number of single malts. We already, I think, saw the Core Expression non-age statement. This is one of their age statements. They've also got the port and the sherry. This is the Madeira. So, that's a Kilbeggan variety. You've got Tullamore Dew. Napogue is a Bushmills sourced. The Jack Ryan is a Cooley sourced. So, single malts from a few different places. And this one I thought was maybe going to be the most up in the air category. And that's mainly because there's just not as many of this style out there. So wasn't sure what was going to come out on top. But it was the Tullamore Dew 14-year-old. So congratulations to Tullamore. I think interestingly enough with this one, so this is the Forwood. This is relatively new. It's been out a few years now. Prior to this, they had the 10-year Forwood variety single malt, which was actually one of my favorites for a number of years. So going back, again, when there wasn't a lot available, that 10-year Forwood Tullamore Dew single malt was real nice. And partly because of that Forwood. So you had bourbon, sherry, port, and Madeira casks being combined. And it kind of, every time you tried it, gave you a little bit of a different, you could like pick up a different taste note, I thought, when you tried it. So they, the Tullamore was actually sourced from Irish distillers up until, I think, 2014, they were purchased and a new distillery was actually built. So this, though, because it's 14 years, is not going to be their own distillate yet because they haven't been making their own stuff for 14 years. So this is, but because it's triple distilled, it's a good bet that this is Bushmills. I think what's the other part that's interesting about this is just how they do it. So it's 13 and a half years in bourbon matured, and then they take it out and they split it up and they put a portion of it into the other 3 casks for 6 months, and then they remarry it and it comes out as the 14-year-old Forwood. So I was kind of glad to see that this one got some recognition. Tullamore Dew, I think, as a brand in general, is the second biggest selling Irish whiskey in the world. So don't think it's any stranger to a lot of people. But this was the 3rd sample. So this one, again, I think it said SM age on it. Didn't pre-pour this one, so I'll do it now. So I'm lagging behind a little bit because I'm talking too much, but Sláinte. Not sure if anybody, I still have an unopened bottle of the old 10-year that once they came out with this, I basically I had it anyway, and I just decided I'll sit on it since they don't make it anymore. But now you can kind of do the side-by-side comparison because it's the 18-year-old that they have, by the way, is the same basic style. It's 4 additional years, but same 4 casks. So that's kind of what they've stuck to. I think we'll see as we get. Wouldn't surprise me if there's another change coming once we get their own stuff coming out. It's been almost 10 years, I guess now, so we're getting closer. I think even 24, 25, you're going to just see more and more coming from some of the newer distilleries and some of the ones that have been putting stuff out there that just haven't gotten the States yet. Wouldn't be surprised you'll start to see more of them hopefully getting onto shelves here in the States in 24 as well. Okay. I haven't had this one in a while. So I was kind of looking forward to when I saw that it came out on top, I decided it would make a nice inclusion. It's part of the sampling. It's been a while. All right. So we're halfway through the sampling lineup. We've got a couple categories we can go through here to kind of catch up. So I don't know if you guys are kind of taking your time with those. You don't need to necessarily rush for the next one. I think we got a couple categories here. But this next one is, I think a fairly unique category that I wanted to recognize, and that's just favorite bottle or label design. And this is just kind of something that I like about a lot of the stuff coming out, especially when you're doing tasting events and things, and you're looking at what some of the newer producers are doing. I think a lot of effort being made by some of the newer distilleries and whiskey makers to differentiate themselves on the shelves. So you see a lot of embossed glass, different color glass, different shaped bottles, just a lot of different styles of packaging coming out to try to stand out, on the shelves as you've got more and more whiskeys coming. So these 5, the first time we've done this category, Limavady is a single cask, single malt, private label. I think all of these, well, no, I shouldn't say that. Lost Irish is another independent. This is their core expression brand. Pretty unique bottle, dark bottle, embossed glass, which is also colored. The whiskey itself is pretty unique. A lot of different cask finishes and styles in a bottle. So if you can grab a bottle of this, I highly recommend it. Same thing with the Limavady. Limavady is very nice, single cask, single malt. The finishing on that is very nice. McConnell's is the sourced core expression blend that's from the McConnell's Distillery in Belfast that is just opened in 23. So we'll be expecting stuff to come from them in the next few years. But in the meantime, they've revived the brand. And the bottling on this, you can see, again, a lot of different things going on with the glass and labeling, different corks being used by them. So again, if you kind of geek out on this stuff, and it's not always just about drinking the whiskey necessarily, but Rowan Co. is another one, fairly unique. Not quite a squat bottle, but a smaller bottle with embossed glass. This is out of the Dublin Distillery. And then finally, Slane Distillery, just north of Dublin. Again, another dark glass bottle. which I kind of like. I know a lot of times people say, oh, they want to be able to see the liquid inside. Um, it's not as important to me necessarily, but you can't see it from this image. But on the side of this bottle, they've got an embossed glass with the name Slain. So a lot of, I think effort, creativity going into some of the packaging on this. So I did want to recognize that in a category. So the winner here, our favorite, I should say, because we're all winners, right? McConnell's. So again, I was just mentioning this, but any of you have seen this bottle in person, it's pretty cool. It's a little bit thinner than most. It's got a wide cork. It's got the copper plate, Spirit of not the Spirit, but the Belfast logo. A lot of information about the history of the brand and whiskey making in Belfast. So they also have a sherry blend as well that's got a more of a, I'll call it reddish purple label, but a similar bottle design. So congratulations to McConnell's. Wanted to do a shout out to those of you that are um, putting some effort into the packaging as well. Okay. Okay. Another new category this year. And again, I think I mentioned this a few minutes ago, but there was some intent to come up with categories that would help expand participation and recognition across the whole industry. So one way to do that is to do a category for favorite distillery, but kind of limit it. So by kind of picking an 8-year cutoff, um, a lot of the more established distilleries were not in the running for this. And if I were to stick with that category, some of these are going to fall off pretty soon too, in terms of not being eligible. But again, the idea was to recognize some of the newer whiskey makers. So again, alphabetically, we've got a Boan, which many of you may be familiar with the Whistler range in the States here. They're also doing quite a bit of single pot still historical mash bill recipes. They've released a couple of them in the last 6 months or so. So very interesting things coming out of there. They're a little bit about a half an hour north of Dublin. If you're in that area, definitely check it out. Clonakilty, they opened in 2019 as well as Boan. Established in 16, they didn't open to the public till actually just before the COVID lockdowns in 19. But they're along the Wild Atlantic Way, southwest part of the country. Quite a few expressions in the States for a number of years now. They really kind of led the charge on the beer finishing in the States, and they've got a lot of local collaborations they've done depending on what state you're in, which are pretty popular. Then you have Cullowen, which formed in 17. They're in County Down, Mourne Mountains Craft Distillery. Sleeve League, the Ardara Distillery is in Donegal. They're probably most known here in the States for the Silky range of whiskeys. They also released their first, the Silky's core, the Silkiest sourced whiskeys. They released their first distillery made stuff in 23. So they're at the point now, along with Boan. Clonakilty is as well. So they've all kind of come of age now where they all have whiskey that's at least 4 years old now, basically, that can be released if they want. So I think a lot of it is just timing. Clonakilty, for example, I think just announced that they'll be releasing stuff that's their own this year, and hopefully it'll come to the States. So we'll have to see. And then lastly, Waterford, which has released a number of single farm and organic single malt whiskeys. They were nominated in the non-age statement single malt category. Cleve League was nominated in the Peated. Cullowen has, I think, 2 nominations in the categories today. So, a lot happening from these newer distillers. And not sure if people have an idea on this one, but the favorite amongst the group was Cullowen. So this, I think, they're the smallest, or again, depending on how you want to measure, but they're definitely one of the smallest distilleries in Ireland. And they put it right in their name, Small Batch Irish Distillery. They have 2 pot stills. They're, Mourne Mountains County Down, I think I mentioned. They put out poteen, gin, rum, liqueurs. So usually what they put out are pretty small batches. A lot of what they've put out are actually in 375 mil bottles, so half of what you're used to. And I think that's just because, smaller size of release, and that way you can get more bottles out there for people to try. But they do a lot of experimental finishes and stuff. And I think obviously from getting the most votes, they've got quite a following. So despite arguably their small size and still lack of distribution in the States, because they're certainly not as widely distributed as the others that were in the category. But they still came out on top. So congratulations to them. I think you'll see more great things to come from them as well as the others. The next category is favorite rum finished Irish whiskey sold in the States. This again is another new category this year. So, again, I try to make an effort to make it interesting, be a little creative, not just have the standard favorite blend, favorite malt, that kind of thing. So I think part of the thinking too is thinking ahead to the 2024. This probably will not be a category, just because I'm going to mix it up again. And that's partly why this one was chosen with a sample. So you should have one that says rum. And the 5 independent bottler brand, they have dozens of different releases. This is their sourced single malt. It's a 6-year. And the rum that they use in this is a dark Caribbean rum. It's 46% ABV single malt. Very nice, particularly if you're a rum fan. The Irish American is another single malt. This one differs in that it's 19 years. So it's one of the older aged single malts available. What's, I think, probably most unique at the time of this release, and this was a special release in honor of the McKay family that owns the Irish American brand at Achill Island Distillery. So this was in honor of their father who passed away and wasn't able to see necessarily the fruition of his efforts to get the whole distillery going, but so this was a very special release, certain number of bottlings. You can read about the history. I think we have it available on the site too, but it was aged exclusively in rum for the full 19 years. So it wasn't finished. It was just a full maturation in a Jamaican rum. It's a Bushmills source, single malt. The Port McGee is a blend you finished in Barbados rum, 40%. It's one of the newer distilleries in Kerry. This is still sourced though. The distillery itself hasn't yet met the 3-year window. But in the meantime, they've got a couple different rum finished expressions out there. Teeling, probably I'll call it the oldest in terms of having a rum variety out there. This is the small batch. So this is part of their core expression, 46%. And then lastly, Tullamore Dew, another blend that is what's interesting, I guess, about this would be this is a triple blend, typical of Tullamore Dew. And what I mean by that is a lot of blends are either malt and grain or single pot still and grain. So think Powers or Bushmills, for example. Whereas this is all 3 styles. So you got single pot still, single malt, single grain. That's the triple blend that's typical of Tullamore Dew and Paddy's as well, for that matter. But this is the XO you can kind of make out on the label. So that's just extra old Caribbean rum. This used to hold, I guess they use one that held Demerara rum. So that's the rum that goes into the cask that they finished this one in. So those are the 5 that got the top nominees for the category. There are a lot of different rum finish stuff out there if you like the style. But the favorite of this group and the one that you've got is the Teeling. This category was an interesting race in that it was going back and forth. And then Teeling, I think, just ultimately emerged. So as I was saying, this is a 46% blend, single malt and grain. This the sample you have is the very first release of this back in 2014. So a little bit, this is the original variety. At the time was in the Florida Cana rum finish from Nicaragua. They don't specifically say or list that source anymore. They just say it's a Central American rum, but you can interpolate, I guess, because technically that's what Nicaragua is. So it still could be there, but they don't actually list the distillery anymore. But at the time of this release, so the ones that you guys have, this is from 2014. So the malt and grain in here are sourced, because Teeling didn't open till 15. The Teeling that you can buy now, the malt is made at Teeling. So if you were to do a side by side, you might notice a little bit different if you've got a very discerning palate. But, I didn't even realize that at the time. And then I looked more closely at the labels and realized that the particular bottle that is now killed, being one of the original bottles from this release. Sometimes bottles work their way to the back of the shelves when you keep buying more stuff and you don't even realize you have it. Then you find it again, and it's like Christmas in July. Um, so this again is one of the core expressions, tealing. So they've got the small batch, single grain, and the single malt, which I think is the 5 cask variety, all non-age statement. So that's their core lineup. And then, of course, they've got too many others to mention, um, be it the Wonders of Wood series, the Revival, the Renaissance, uh, the wine finish stuff. And then they just do the really old age statement single malts. They're always releasing something. Matter of fact, in the last week, they just announced a new duty-free exclusive right now, the Crystal Malt variety. So anybody traveling over there, I'd recommend you grab one of those. Anyone who's had the Bushmills 1608, the 400th anniversary whiskey that used crystal malt. So this is the first one I've seen since that. But Teeling's always releasing something, it seems. A lot of good stuff coming from them, and this is one of the ones you can get for very reasonable price. Higher ABV blend with a nice little rum component to it. So it does kind of set itself apart from, some of the other blends in the price range, which, might be sherry finished or just bourbon finished, for example. The rum definitely brings a little bit of a different element to it, I think. I think obviously majority agree since this came out on top as far as favorites in the rum category. Now we've got a couple of interesting categories coming up. So a lot of again, trying if I were to try to describe all the categories in the Izzys, and I've mentioned this a little bit already, but part of the idea was recognizing some of the newer distilleries or whiskey makers, recognizing bottles and packaging, recognizing some of the older blue bloods, but trying to come up with categories, that maybe too would be a little bit unique, maybe less represented. So not everybody may have had the whiskeys in the next few categories, but this first one is cask strength. And most of the things that are cask strength, I guess I would say would be more limited edition stuff. You don't see a ton of what I'd call core expression cask strength, which I would argue these are. There are plenty of other, one-off kind of cask strength stuff that I know people have liked. But not everybody's had cask strength because it's not for everybody. Some people don't like to have to add water to their whiskey, or it's too much effort, lots of different, or it's just too strong. They don't, want to have to water it down, that kind of thing. But there's a huge following for this style, the cask strength style, and you see that more and more with popular brands that were maybe originally 40%, and people want the cask strength version. I think you saw that with Powers John's Lane, even though that was 46. Everybody's been clamoring for a cask strength version for years, and they finally delivered. So these 5 nominees are cask strengths that are readily available, kind of on an ongoing basis. First is the Irishman. So Walsh Whiskey produces the Irishman and the Writer's Tears range, and they're both represented here in the category this year. So each year they do an annual release. The Irishman 23, the Writer's Tears 23. So those are both represented here in the category. Jack Ryan This is their Raglan Road 5-year, which has a stout finish component to it. Again, so this is the second nominee for Jack Ryan today. Killowen, which we already recognized a couple categories ago. So this is, I think, one of the two nominated whiskeys they had. This is their rum raisin variety. This is a 5-year single malt. Again, it's a cask strength, as all these are. So they're all at different, ABVs. So I think, let's see if I wrote these down. No, I didn't write down. I can't read the writing, but they're all 55, 60% range. Two Stacks is another independent label maker. They have quite a few cask strength expressions out there. So they have the regular, what I'll call the regular expression, blender's cut, which is what you see nominated here. So they have a regular blender's cut version, and then this is the cask strength version. It's a multi mash bill. It's got different grains, malts, a little bit of peat, a little bit of single pot still in there. And then they've done a number of these where they've finished them in different casks as well. So they're definitely championing the cask strength segment. So again, I would encourage people to try these if they haven't, and just realize that adding water is not a bad thing. Arguably, that's the intention of the makers, that they're giving it to you in its pure form right out of the cask and allowing you to water it down to your desired profile. Because that's, I guess, the criticism when people put stuff out at 40 or 43%, and they want it to be a little bit of a higher proof. So this allows you to kind of do it yourself. Some people don't want to have to go through the trouble, but again, to each his own. So, but the favorite in this category was Writer's Tears. So, again, Writer's Tears is, and Irishmen have been releasing a cask strength version for a number of years. So they definitely, I think, have the brand recognition in this category. And what's interesting about these, is each year will be a little bit different, because it's an annual limited edition release. But the 2023 version was at 54.8. It's an American oak. So, and the I think we did the Writer's Tears in our tasting earlier in mid was it June? For Bloomsday. We did the Bloomsday event this past year. And the cask strength version, not 23, but the prior year was one of the samples that we did in that packaging. So I know it's a favorite in general amongst people, and it has been for a number of years. Okay. So I mentioned how we've got some kind of unique categories here coming up towards the end. So these have, what I would call less potential participation, in that cask strength is going to, in some cases, price people out because it's going to be a little more pricey. In this case, we've got favorite limited edition. So these are whiskeys that, by their very name, are limited, which could mean bottling run as well as distribution. So I think some people hadn't tried quite a few of these, if any. But in going through the nominees here, alphabetically Dubliner, which is brand from the Liberties in Dublin. This was an exclusive they did, available in Pennsylvania, collab for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So again, I'm not expecting everybody to have been able to get their hands on this, but wanted to recognize, the stuff that came out that's unique and, for lack of a better word, limited, and that because in a couple of years this stuff won't be around anymore. So we got to recognize it while we can. The second one, Green Spot, I mentioned earlier when we were doing the spot category, the Wine Geese range. This is the latest release in that range of green spots that came out in 23. This is the Quail's Gate version. The Killowen, this is the second nominee from them in the Izzys this year. This is the Baron Tool. It's a 3-year. It's a cognac finish, single pot still. Fourth is from Teeling. This is the second release in their Wonders of Wood program. So again, a lot of their stuff, that they're either trying to emphasize the wine finish. In this case, with the wood series, they're really trying to emphasize the cask. So this is the single pot still aged in Portuguese oak. And then lastly, a new entrant. So this would be the first nomination for Tom and Gate out of Limerick. And this is a ruby port finish. And the tie-in here is this was to honor Michael Hogan, kind of a Limerick hero, fought for Portugal, which is the tie-in to the ruby port finish. It's also a cask strength, 59.75. A lot of times these limited editions will have a higher ABV as well. So like the Teeling was 50%. The Killowen, I think, was 61% cask strength. So a lot of you can see the overlap you get with cask strength, with limited editions, things like that. So in theory, some of these could have fallen into other categories if I didn't have the one whiskey rule. But let's take a look at what the favorite for limited edition in 23, and it was Green Spot. So this category was very close. I'll say that. It was kind of back and forth to the point where I had to hold up kind of like a lot of the categories. It was clear who had gotten the most votes. I think there were 2 categories that came down to the very end and were only separated by a vote. And this was one of them. But the Quail's Gate, I got to say, certainly not a bad choice. It was one of my favorite whiskeys of the year, personally. I'm a big fan of Green Spot. I thought what I liked about this was the higher ABV at 46%. The Quail's Gate's a winery in Canada that's owned by Irish immigrants from Kildare. And they opened up a winery there. This is a Pinot Noir cask finish. So it takes the standard Green Spot, does 16 months additional finishing in that Pinot cask, and then gets released in a higher ABV. So if you're a fan of Green Spot and haven't had a chance to try this yet, I highly recommend you do so. It's limited, which there's limited and then there's really limited. I guess what I would say is for Middleton, this is limited, which is going to probably make it wider distribution than maybe some other regular stuff. But unlike the other wine geese releases that have been around for years now. This is expected to be a one-off. It's not a permanent addition to the range, so it is limited. So if you see it, don't expect that you're going to see it a year from now. It's kind of like what's been made has been made, and it's out there, and grab it while you can, kind of thing. And if they announce any change to that, we'll let you know. But I don't think that's the intention of this particular release. But this is a real nice whiskey. Steve, I can't see you all, but I'm guessing some of you are scouring Google as we speak, trying to see where you can get it. I know what you guys do. Okay, coming down the home stretch. And we've got 2 whiskeys to go. So again, kind of 3 in a row, what I would call more of the interesting, unique category creation. So this one is subjective, I'll admit, but it's favorite, unique, or unusual cask finish Irish whiskey, again, available here in the States. So I'll spend a few minutes just kind of going over these. I encourage all of you to try to get your hands on these if you can, or if you can't get a bottle, just try them. I think all of them. I'm just thinking here. I think one of them might be tough to get in Ireland. The bottle you can get here though. The others you should be able to get if you're visiting Ireland at a bar. So if you only wanted to try a sample kind of thing. The first though, going alphabetically, is from Cask. This is their kombu expression single malt. And what makes this unique is it's the first Irish whiskey to utilize seaweed in the finishing. So what they did is they took the kombu seaweed and they put it in, and they charred it in virgin oak casks as part of the process. It's originally bourbon cask, single malt, 46%, but it's going to give a real maritime. I have a hard time explaining it other than the seaweedy kind of element to it. I picked up a bottle when it came out. It's been out a few years. They've got a few other expressions now as well. Definitely fits the unique bill. Definitely worth trying if you haven't already. Even if, again, you don't want a whole bottle of it, definitely worth your while to try it in a bar. You can get a sample of it. And that's true of all these, because these are all going to be a little bit out there. They're going to be bolder and a little bit different than your typical bourbon sherry whiskey that's probably 80% of the expressions out there. The second one is Method and Madness. No surprise that this would be in the nominees, given that they're releasing everything they do is a little bit out there. Not all of the stuff that Method of Madness does, however, makes it to the States. This one did. This is the Japanese chestnut variety. So really kind of qualifies in 2 respects. It's a single pot still bourbon sherry, original maturation, and then it's finished in the Japanese chestnut. So unique in that it's Japanese, Cask, and also that it's the chestnut, which is a different wood type, and it's going to give you different flavor profile. Third one, San Patricios, might be less known by everyone, but it's definitely one I think worth seeking out. This is a 7-year single malt. It's at a 50% ABV. So it definitely fits the bill for those looking for a higher ABV. I don't think it's technically not cask strength, but it's still coming up there high. But really what sets this one apart is it's aged exclusively in tequila and mezcal casks. So you get both of those varieties in there. I know there have been other Irish whiskeys, some in tequila, some in mezcal. This is both the single malt, high ABV, so it kind of checks a lot of boxes. Definitely one worth checking out, but definitely makes it pretty unique. Fourth one is from Two Stacks. So this is the second Two Stacks nominee tonight. We saw one earlier that was the Cask Strength Blender's Cut. This is that, but takes it up a notch with extra finishing. So they've got a number of these where they've got the Cask Strength Blender's Cut that they've done in different wood types, for example. This is the apricot brandy variety, which don't see a lot of apricot finishing, which is what makes this unique. And then lastly, we have Writer's Tears, which I think is the I think this is the third nomination tonight for Writer's Tears, but this is the Enniskillen ice wine finish. So again, first time Irish whiskey done in that type of finish. And just gonna check chat real quick, make sure there's no questions or anything. But so in this unusual category, the one that came out on top as the favorite is the Writer's Tears. And this one, you have a sample. It's the one that should say UN on it, I believe. Should be easy to figure out because you should only have two left, unless you cheated and went ahead. But so this one is a release. Well, I think it's been out about a year now. And it takes the regular Writer's Tears and it just does additional finishing. So what can we tell you about the Enniskillen ice wine? So that is, we were just talking a minute ago about the Quail's Gate. This is actually another Canadian winery. So two favorites in a row, Irish whiskeys that were finished in former wine casks from wineries in Canada. So that's pretty interesting, actually. First of its kind. It spent a year in the Enniskillen ice wine casks. What else can I tell you? Writer's Tears. So the other thing you could argue, Writer's Tears just on its own is unique in that it was at the time, especially, didn't really have a category because it was a blend that didn't contain any grain. It had 40% single malt, 60% single pot still. So it was a pretty unusual blend in and of itself. And then you take it and you put it in a pretty unique wine cask for a year. And hence you get the favorite unique or unusual cask finish Irish whiskey. So, me. Don't wait for me. I didn't have them all pre-poured. But Slancha. So this one, if you haven't tried it before, it's, to me, it comes across, it's very sweet, particularly compared to some of the other ones we've had. Part of when I was putting together the lineup for samples, I wanted to have a cross section of styles, distilleries, things like that. I didn't want it to be all the same, coming from the same place or having a similar flavor profile. So that's kind of how some of them were chosen. But I think it's definitely, sweeter than your normal writer's tears. And I think the ice wine finish kind of mellows out some of the spiciness too of regular writer's tears, which some people may like, some people may not like. Um, but again, these are going to be um, potentially a little bit more, I don't know if polarizing is the right word, but they're all, again, pretty unique finishes that are definitely worth trying. Might not be everybody's cup of tea. But, and so this is an interesting category. We'll see if we can, repeat it again next year with other new stuff. I know um, more and more keeps coming every day, and people are pushing the boundaries of finishes and things. So hopefully we can get 5 maybe new nominees in this category next year. Okay. So I think we have 2 more categories left for those keeping count. The So again, the idea of the categories was to recognize the cross sections to some of the newer makers, but don't want to leave out some of the traditional blue bloods that carried the industry through a lot of tough times. So this is favorite Bushmills expression. Bushmills has too many to count, releases out there. Not all of them here in the States yet, but they've been doing quite a bit more under new ownership the last couple of years. But these are the 5 nominees for this category. 4 of them are the single malts, the core range. So you have the 10, 12, 16, 21. They kind of go from bourbon sherry, then they get additional finishing, Marsala, port, Madeira. The first one is the Black Bush expression, which is the only blend among these 5. So you've got 4 of the core range single malt and the Black Bush blend. And we'll kind of jump right to this one and Black Bush, which I was mildly surprised that this was the favorite, and not because I don't think highly of Black Bush, quite the contrary. I was just expecting something else, and this one pretty much took over the lead right away and carried it the whole time. Couple challenges a little bit, but in the end kind of held out strong. So but Blackbush, again, this probably should be on everybody's bar if it's not already. It's been around, again, one of the few surviving distilleries during the tough times in the industry. Great value and quality blend. What makes this blend better than most, in my opinion? It's an 80% malt, only 20% grain blend. Most blends out there that you'll see are 20 to 30% malt, 70 to 80% grain. So this is the opposite, very high malt content blend. And it's a highly sherried finish as well. So you kind of, for those of you that like your sherried whiskeys and value blends, you really can't do much better than Blackbush. I think it's the best of their blends for sure, and really kind of a tried and true, better than most blends out there. and I think it's quality of the distillery, but just the components that go into it to kind of make this one stand out. And because of their size and distribution, you can get it for a very reasonable price. Oh. So jumped ahead. Luckily, I didn't reveal anything. Yeah, I think the Bushmill single malts are I think part of it, at least by having them all in the same category, probably split the vote. So maybe a little unfair. Because if I just did the single malts and didn't have this one, I'd be curious what would have. I think I know what would have won based on what came in second, but it would have, interesting. I think what's interesting is based on the voting in a couple categories. One of the things I was glad about was people weren't chasing age statement. So older doesn't necessarily mean better. Can mean better, but it doesn't, by just because it's older doesn't make it better. So it wasn't like that was dominating just because I'll pick the oldest kind of thing. So I was kind of glad to see that. Okay. Last category. This again is an attempt to acknowledge a lot of the whiskey makers out there that are not distilleries. And so this is favorite bonder or independent bottler. There are a growing number of these. I do want to take a moment to talk a little bit about some of these guys or gals, I should say, not to offend anybody, because they do quite a bit to expand a lot of the variety that you get to drink. If it was just left to some of the big distillers, they put out their core stuff and they might not necessarily be pushed to try new things. So a lot of the unique stuff that you get or have tried has been because these bonders or independent labels have been able to acquire casks or independently contract with some of the distilleries to produce whiskeys that are favorites of a lot of people. So just in talking about these guys, so Egan's is the first one alphabetically. Started, so a lot of these are have been around a long time, but were interrupted. So Egan's is a name that goes back over 100 years in the whiskey business. Went basically out of business, so to speak, when the industry was in demise. Resurrected. They're in Tullamore. So 2015 really came back on the scene, and they've released a whole host of different variety expressions. A lot of single malts, aged stuff, non-aged stuff, pretty widely available. I know Total Wine carries a lot of the Egan stuff, for example, in the States. So definitely worth checking out. A lot of their stuff's limited edition type stuff, but they've put out quite a few nice things. Jack Ryan had 2 nominees tonight, and I mentioned we did the event with them in 23. They're in Dublin. Again, the Ryan family goes back over 100 years in the whiskey business as bonders. They own the bar Beggar's Bush in Dublin, and they have a lineup of finished whiskeys. They just actually took an award at the Irish Whiskey Awards in November for Whiskey of the Year for the Shelbourne new one. So it's not available here yet. I don't think it's going to come to the States. I'm not sure. But so they're doing quite a few good things as well. JJ Corey, I think most of you probably know, County Clare started in 2015 as well. Really kind of made a point of bringing bonding back onto the map, so to speak, even though others were already doing it. I think because Jack Ryan predated it, Egan's came out at the same time. Walsh had been around for 20 years, but JJ Corey really kind of made a point of explaining what bonding was, and would put out stuff and kind of made it, I don't want to say taboo in the past, but like really kind of tried to make it so that it was more acceptable. And so a lot of you have probably seen the Gale and Hanson, to name a couple, that are part of the core expressions that are available in the States. Walsh is the oldest of this group, the oldest, I think, of all of them, really, that exists, and started in '99. So Walsh had a number of nominees tonight. So again, responsible for the Irishman and Writer's Tears brands. So, dozens of different varieties in both of those brand names. So no surprise that they'd be one of the top five. And then lastly, alphabetically, W.D. O'Connell, probably, I think, the newest of the five. Started in 18, Dahi O'Connell. So those are your five. They had two nominees tonight as well. The Bill Phil in the peated and the 10-year single grain in the rye category. So kind of earlier on in the night. But so those are your five of your, bonders putting out a lot of stuff. So we wanted to recognize their efforts. And the favorite is voted by all of you, W.D. O'Connell.
Wow.
So interesting, well-deserved. Congratulations, Dahi, on this. It's interesting to see how things shake out too, because, two nominees tonight. So definitely acknowledged there. Did not win either, but gets favored overall. Whereas Walsh had two of their whiskeys declared favorite, but weren't favored overall. So it just goes to show you. I think there's some pull here too on with WD, because they do have a lot of other things that they've done, limited edition things that people have been able to try. So definitely a lot of good things coming out of WD, even if you haven't had a chance to maybe see it on the shelves here in the States yet. But they operate out of County Waterford. Relatively small operation, not to diminish it in any way. I know some of you, I think, have visited, have warehouse where they have bottling and blending operation, and are putting out different things. So they're acquiring casks from a lot of different distilleries, and then they'll put their own twist on it, either through aging or finishing, what have you, and then putting it out there. So I would encourage you guys to try some of this stuff if you're not familiar with some of the names. That's kind of part of the idea of the Izzys, is to again celebrate Irish whiskey, promote those that are making the whiskeys, especially a lot of the new stuff. Because again, remember, I mentioned it up front, there were only 3 operating distilleries about a dozen years ago. Now there are over 40, and there are dozens of independent labels and whiskey makers, and they're all trying to fight for limited space on the shelves here in the States, and some of them are still fighting just to get their product over here. Everything is coming. This is the second age renaissance, however you want to label it, of Irish whiskey. So it's still very young. There's still a lot of distilleries that haven't put out product yet, or are still waiting for it to come of age or to get it to the States. So more and more good stuff's coming, but It'll certainly be helped if people, I think, try the new stuff. And, I know it's hard sometimes because you're used to stuff out of Middleton, Bushmills, Teeling, which are certainly recognized brands making great stuff. But if we want to have more breadth in the overall industry, trying some of these new smaller places, and that's why it's good to see WD O'Connell recognized, Cullowen as one of the smallest distilleries recognized. So obviously, people are becoming more aware of them, and and hopefully this helps as well, and people be more willing to try their stuff, because I think those who have, based on the voting, would agree that it's stuff worth trying. Okay, so some of you may be wondering why you have a whiskey left, and we've done all the categories. And that's because there's an additional award that I created this year. That's not one that was open for voting. So again, if you're anybody who's, likes to watch the Oscars or the Grammy or any of that stuff, over the years, you may be aware that they'll recognize lifetime achievement type awards, things like that. So that's kind of, think of it in that way. That's kind of what this is. This is an award that I'm picking, and I'd like it to be an annual thing. And so here's my loose definition for lifetime favorite. Had a significant impact on the history, growth, or popularity of the Irish whiskey industry. So in one way or another, what I chose and what I'm going to choose going forward each year is going to have some significant impact one way or the other, that we'll talk about. So the last whiskey that you have, and I don't know, some of you probably won't be surprised by this. I wasn't really trying to pull a fast one or break new ground or anything, but what I chose to represent lifetime favorite for 23 was
Allan, can we make bets before you do it?
Too late.
Oh,
Too late.
damn it.
Hank, I bet you it's Redbreast 12. How much do you want to wager?
I had a pregnant pause there. I didn't rush it. But yeah, so Redbreast 12 was what I thought would be a good representative of this award for the inaugural lifetime favorite. And there's a whole host of reasons. So again, this is the last one. I think it says lifetime or life favorite or something. I can't remember. I don't have those samples myself, so I'm pouring it. But Redbreast 12. So again, I keep going back because some of you may have been drinking Irish whiskey for 30 years, others may be new to it. But when we started in 2010, this was the Irish whiskey at the time. There wasn't a lot to choose from. And if you asked anybody, Redbreast, was representative of Irish whiskey. Arguably, you could say it still is, but whenever you would do a tasting and you would include Redbreast in the lineup, Redbreast would always win. It got to be a point where you would exclude Redbreast from the lineup just so you could get people to try other things. Again, the industry's changed a bit over the last 12 years, but if you go back to that time, you had 3 operating distilleries, and you didn't have, so I'm showing you a picture here, the full lineup of Redbreast now, what I'll call their core lineup. They've got dozens of other non-age statement, wood finishes, and dream cask, and bottlings, and you name it. But this is their core range. But back then, it was just the 12-year. And then they did the 15 and the Lustau, and then they, did the 21 and the 27. So they've really expanded the lineup. But this is the one that is the biggest selling single pot still, which is the style of Irish whiskey. We want to get technical. Let me just stop here and so Sláinte.
Sláinte.
So again, single pot still whiskey, is the Irish style of whiskey, malted, unmalted barley, and redbreast is really was the representation of it, because back then you didn't have John's Lane 12. Green Spot existed, but was a Dublin only whiskey, really. So that whole lineup of spots didn't exist. It was redbreast. And even redbreast itself, which was a super popular whiskey back in, say, 150 years ago, went out, disappeared for a time. So this is originally, it was a kind of like the Spots, was a bonded whiskey. Gilbey's out of London was a bonder, created the brand. It was actually it was sourced from Jameson in Dublin, and it actually wasn't called redbreast originally. They think it was the one that was referred to. You might see signs and things. The JJ Liqueur whiskey 12-year was the original Gilbey's single pot still. The owner was a big bird fan and named it after the robin redbreast. So I think the earliest reference to that is 1912. So a little over 100 years ago. But as the industry itself went into demise, and as those of you that know your Irish whiskey history, and like in the early 70s there, when they kind of all closed up shop and consolidated out of Dublin and down into Middleton, into one distillery down there. So kind of like what happened with Cooley when that was sold to Beam 10 years ago, all of the independent contracts that they had pretty much were ended. So what Gilbey did is, at the time when that was happening, secured an arrangement and got a bunch of whiskey and just kind of stored it in his warehouse. But then basically ran out. So by the time 1985, I think, came around, he had run out. And basically redbreast was gone. And what happened in 86 was then he finally said, okay, I don't have any left, because I've been hoarding my dwindling stock for the last dozen years. He sold the brand name back to Irish distillers at that point. And then in 91, Irish distillers re-released Redbreast 12. So it was really the first time it had been out on the market since 91. I'm sorry, it came out in 91, first time in 10 years since the early 80s. So there was about a decade stretch there where you really couldn't get Redbreast. It came back out, and during that time it was Redbreast and Green Spot. But it really took off from there, and kind of, you could say the rest is history. It spawned this whole lineup of whiskeys now. So it's kind of a survivor. Most people, if you would ask them if they've tried an Irish whiskey, this is one that they would have tried. So again, I think from a history, the style, what it's done for the category, how it's helped really expand Irish whiskey, I think it's a worthy Irish whiskey to be named the first lifetime favorite. What did some of you think? What were you going to bet, Hank, if I had given you another 3 seconds?
Got to come off mute. I was thinking like just basic powers, like you're like a powers guy, and it was either that or powers John Lane, one or the other. But this is a great choice.
Yeah, so I think there definitely are some worthy candidates, and I think I have given some thought to not looking too far ahead down the road, but like who would be candidates if I had to pick today for the next several years, and I've kind of got them in my head. And I think it wouldn't all be from the same distillery, but I think, and I think as we go forward, there's going to be something, because there have been so many big events in the history of Irish whiskey, that you can kind of maybe figure out what could be coming from some of the different distilleries, what they've done or what they've represented at the time they came out, or what they did to help save the industry, things like that. So, but I thought it would be kind of a fun way to end the categories. So those are the 14 category favorites plus the lifetime favorite. So in all, there were 60 different Irish whiskeys nominated. We had a couple multiple winners or favorites, Walsh being one. Had a repeat favorite in Connemara. It got good recognition for two of the newer makers in WD and Cologne. So, all in all, I think things are going in the right direction. And I hope it gets harder, to be honest with you. I hope it gets tougher to figure out who's in some of the categories, and there's just more whiskeys that are eligible. So just thanks everyone who joined for the second annual Izzy Awards. I appreciate it. Look forward to another great year. If you're not a member, encourage you to join. We let non-members vote, but in order to participate in the event, you do need to be a member. We've got a lot of other great things going on, trips, tastings. I'll be releasing our February tasting event beginning of the week. But look forward to seeing y'all down the road and sharing a whiskey. So thanks again.